Next year, the M74 is closed northbound from junction 13 to 11. This is at the beginning of the M74, just south of Larkhall, of course. The M6 in Cumbria is down to a single lane for a second day on the trot, northbound junction 43 to 44 towards Carlisle. A lorry overturned yesterday, and I think the emergency repairs and recovery work continues. And there are no West Coast mainline trains north of Preston, no East Coast mainline trains north of Newcastle. You're being advised not to travel by train north of York. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
And good luck!
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Jubes & Co. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump was talking very tough indeed during the elections regarding deportations. I can tell you, he was not messing around. Today, he's got young men with chains around their waists, frog marched out onto the plains and out of there. I want to look at that. Also, do you know what the CAN bill is? It stands for Climate and Nature. Hardly anybody knew about it, but I can tell you it would have had a massive impact on your life today. It was a gentle July. We need to discuss this bill. And it's been ruled that the judges involved in the Sarah Sharif case can be named. This was after the naming of them was originally blocked, apparently, to prevent lynch mobs. So, is then the naming of them right or not? And get this, the number of British kids saying that they suffer from gender distress is 50 times higher now than it was a decade ago. And the rest? What on earth is going on? On my panel tonight, a new face for you, ladies and gents. Samuel Sweet, the political commentator, and a returning face, Charlie Downs, the broadcaster. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live to the 6 o'clock news headlines.
A very good evening. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Here are your top stories. Storm Eowyn is sweeping across the UK, bringing record-breaking winds and severe weather conditions. 1 in 5 flights from airports in the UK and Ireland have been cancelled today, and millions of people have been urged to stay home. Forecasters have flagged a rare threat-to-life red weather warning. Over 4 million people across Northern Ireland and Scotland received emergency alerts from the Met Office last night, with guidance on how to stay safe. More than 240,000 homes and businesses are without power in Northern Ireland, and a wind speed of 114 miles per hour brought by the storm has been recorded in Ireland, the fastest since records began. 20,000 Scottish Power customers across the centre and the south of the country are without electricity, and a red danger to life warning for wind has been extended in Scotland, where more than 35,000 properties have lost power. Local authorities have warned commuters to avoid travel at all costs. And the Southport child killer will likely die behind bars after murdering 3 girls at a dance class. But his 52-year sentence has sparked calls for law changes. Axel Rudagabana received one of the highest minimum custody terms on record for the attack in Southport in July last year, when he was 17 years old. Alice de Silva Aguiar, B.B. King and Elsie Dot Stankham were all killed, and harrowing details of the attack were heard at Liverpool Crown Court yesterday. However, Southport's Labour MP Patrick Hurley said the sentence was not severe enough, and he asked the Attorney-General to review it as unduly lenient. Due to Rudagabana's age at the time of the attack, he cannot legally receive a whole-life order. The head of the UK's largest police force has welcomed a review of contempt of court laws and said it would be great if more information in cases could be shared at an earlier stage. And Scotland's first ever visitor levy for overnight stays has been approved by councillors in Edinburgh. Visitors staying in the city will have to pay a 5% fee per night, capped at 7 nights, which is expected to raise up to £50 million a year for the local authority. The charge will be applied on bookings made after the 1st of May this year for accommodation stays from July 2026. And 2 giant pandas have made their public debut at the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington, D.C. A zoo volunteer says Bao Li, a male whose name translates to active and vital power, and King Bao, a female whose name means green and treasure, have already won the hearts of our staff and volunteers. The pandas, both 3 years old, make their much welcome return after a 15-month absence. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back in an hour, but now it's back to Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight here on Jubes and Go. That was nice, wasn't it? Ending the bulletins there on the panda story. We could just sit and look at that all the time because that's the kind of thing we need to see. Something nice, something uplifting. If I never had to see that guy Axel Rudegabana's picture ever again for as long as I lived, I would be absolutely delighted. Alongside me tonight, my panel, I've got Charlie Downs, the broadcaster, and a new face, Samuel Sweet, the political commentator. Good evening to both of you. Very welcome to you. You're very welcome. We do love a new face on Jubes and Co, don't we? And you know the drill. It's not just about us three. It is very much about you at home. What is on your mind tonight, ladies and gents? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. You can email me. I am a little bit old-fashioned like that. You can get me on gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website gbnews.com/yoursay, or of course you can tweet or X me. And I know it's Friday night, you might want to go out and about, so you can take me with you on the radio if you do. Now, if I said to you the CAN bill, would you know what that was? Many people absolutely do not, so you wouldn't be alone if you don't. It's a huge bill. It stands for Climate and Nature. It was actually debated, discussed today. Long story short, it's been kicked, essentially, the can down the road and deferred until July. I want to listen to Carla Denyer. She was talking about it.
Crisis is too big, too existential to leave to a party machinery whose prime motivation, it seems, is just to be seen to win. This bill was first tabled by the first Green MP, Caroline Lucas, 4 years ago. It is and always has been a chance for collaborative cross-party endeavour. It is supported by many of the government's backbenchers, and the Labour Party itself pledged agreement with the principles of the bill not long ago.
That's Carla Denyer there, the co-leader of the Greens. Was that Carla Denyer, the same person that was talking about lighting candles when Donald Trump got elected? Is my mind serving me right on that one or not? So we're talking about Donald Trump a little bit later on in the show. But this would have been a very significant bill. It would have basically put so many more of these climate targets into law. Hardly anyone really out there on the streets of Britain seemed to know about this, but it would have had quite big ramifications for people's lives, costs of things and so on and so forth. Where are you on this one, Charlie?
Well, as I've said on the programme before, I think of myself as being an environmentalist. I think that preserving and protecting the natural environment is the responsibility of those of us who, it has been handed down to. Britain, for example, is a beautiful garden that's been cultivated over generations and therefore deserves to be preserved. With that being said, the particular kind of environmentalist philosophy that the Climate and Nature Bill belongs to is the one that so much of our other laws belong to, which is it's essentially using a narrative crafted by international bodies to justify an extension of managerial control over the lives of ordinary people. It seeks to create a Climate and Nature Assembly, which is yet another unelected bureaucratic body that answers to nobody. It seeks to reduce the use of fossil fuels as quickly as possible, is what it says in the bill, which would inevitably lead to massive increases in energy costs, once again affecting those most vulnerable more so than anybody else. And it's just, you know, if you actually read this bill, it's couched in the language of protecting the environment, but when the rubber hits the road, it seems to just be another excuse for the state to exert more control over the day-to-day business of normal people.
So it's a no from Charlie. Are you into this, Bill?
Well, I think to be honest with you, we can talk as much as we want about the impact of this bill.
Good, because we're on air till 7.
But really, what we need to be talking about as well is the if we do not take the climate crisis seriously, the inaction would be unforgivable.
But we haven't got an action, though, have we? We've got the Climate Control Act 2008 as a small example. If I had £1 for every time I hear people talking about net zero, I'd have retired about 500 times by now.
No, you're right. You're right. But what the bill argues is that science has changed since then, research has developed, and further action and more swift action is needed. The Labour government, as we saw in the clip there, have continually kicked their climate commitments further and further down the road, and we're getting to the point now. And the science is agreed around the world. It's universally agreed that the climate crisis will have a horrible and irreversible impact on, say, global farming, floods, wildfires, droughts.
Is that universally agreed, or is it that actually the people, the scientists, that perhaps do disagree or take a slightly different opinion are often censored and shut down? No, I think that it is almost the complete universal agreement. Of course, there are people who have an opposing view to it, but the bodies of which our government and is signed up to and our commitments agree that this is the course of action that needs to be taken. Where the Labour government has failed here is it's kicking the can further down the road, and we are simply running out of time, which is what the bill argues. Now, we can talk as well... Running out of time for what?
To essentially secure the long-term and sustainable future of our planet. It's no secret that extreme weather events are becoming more and more common in the United States. We've had the wildfires in California a few months before that.
You're not blaming them on climate change, are you?
The climate change has allowed for the ground to dry to the point where the fire's been able, so the fire can spread through the hills of Los Angeles.
But you've had a load of randoms wandering around setting fire to things. You've had very poorly managed policies when it comes to how they manage the forest. You've had bad management when it comes to some of the processes around how they manage their water flows.
Right, of course, and all of that is contributing to a very, very serious problem. This takes a global, national and local response, and the government on a local and national level, and many other governments around the world, to be fair, are failing to meet those commitments, and the consequences will be dire for our communities here, and particularly in the global south when you think about farmers, when you think about agriculture.
Yeah, well, when you talk about farming and agriculture, one of the concerns that people flagged with this CAN bill, Charlie, was that there was a lot of concern around it gave people a lot of sweeping powers, and one of the concerns would be that there would be land grabs, so farming land would be essentially seized for the purposes of rewilding, for the purposes of solar farms, battery centres and so on.
Well, this is what I find so difficult to understand about this particular brand of environmentalism. You know, this is called the Climate and Nature Bill, supposedly dedicated to preserving the natural environment, and yet their solution is to pave over the natural environment with, with these solar and wind farms, which consistently don't generate enough energy. And just in terms of something that Sam just said, which is that the science is settled, it's always interesting to listen to those people, especially on the international stage, who hold real power. I'm talking about figures like Tony Blair, I'm talking about figures like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, because these people always speak in the language of consensus. They speak as though the debate is settled. There's no more conversation to be had. If you listen to Blair when he was Prime Minister, globalisation is inevitable. The question is whether we get on board or get left behind. If you listen to Larry Fink in his letter to CEOs that he puts out every year, all of these things, including the climate stuff, are inevitable. Therefore, the question is to get on board or be left behind. What I would say is that the science that is used to justify policies like this are hand-picked by people who have other ulterior motives, which, as I've said already, is essentially an extension of unelected, unaccountable managerial power over the lives of ordinary people. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't something like a climate crisis going on. I think the language around the issue is quite alarmist, and I think that there is a grown-up conversation to be had. But I just find it impossible to understand how people, Sam, like yourself, who are, we're supposed to be speaking for and concerned about the interests of ordinary people. But this agenda is clearly an elite-driven project, and these are elites who could have no regard for the well-being of ordinary people. This is what we would call the capitalist class, ultimately, the likes of Fink and so on, and his friends in Davos. These are people who own huge and control huge amounts of capital, who will doubtless benefit from the things that this bill brings in.
Yes, the thing is on that, I don't actually disagree with your point. I think that capitalism has to be discussed as a wider contributing factor to the extremities of the climate crisis. There's always somebody looking to make a profit.
And those people are backing this bill.
Perhaps they are, but it does not make the bill completely irrelevant and that can make the bill completely something that shouldn't be passed. What we need to talk about is how the bill can be used to empower communities and empower people by upskilling the British workforce, by changing the way that we build things in this country, changing the way that we do things in this country. Public transport needs major investment. We need to look into building more trains, cutting down the amount of road that is built, essentially, and make public transport a lot cheaper. We need to cut down on millionaires and billionaires flying about and cutting about in private jets all the time.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I don't think this bill does this, because, again, what this bill does is it cedes more power to unelected bodies like the Climate and Nature Assembly, which is described as being composed of experts and administrators and all the rest of it. But we know how these bodies are always formed, which is they are not politically neutral as they are presented as being. They always contain and represent a political agenda, but once again, the language of consensus is used to sort of mystify and what's the word I'm looking for? Obscure the political nature of these organisations. Because you look, for example, at comparable organisations like the Migration Advisory Committee, the OBR, and so on. All of these bodies that have been set up in the last 30 or so years. And if you look at the direction of travel that all of these bodies support, it is always towards more and more state control over the lives of ordinary people. And once again, everything you just said, investment in public transport and empowering of ordinary people, I'm absolutely on board with all of that. But I don't think that's what this does. I think it uses the language of those sorts of causes and ideas, but it uses the language of those causes and ideas to sell it to people, and to sell it to people who are rightfully concerned about the environment. But I don't think it is what it seems. I think it's essentially a Trojan horse.
Final word to you, if you want one.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, like I said, I do not think that nullifies the bill in itself. I think that we do need to essentially unwrap the claws of capitalism from the way that we do things in this country and around the world. We need to empower our workforce, our trade unions, our communities. And I agree that there is unwavering and horrendous influence from other vested interests looking to make a quick buck out of the destruction of our planet.
Well, you're certainly going to have to upskill or reskill many of your workforce, because we've all seen what's going on in the car industry as a small example. And if the jobs do not exist because of these agendas, you are absolutely need to reskill them. We talk about millionaires and billionaires flying around all over the place. It always makes me laugh when it comes to things like Davos. They're all flying in without a hoot's consideration about their emissions, to sit there and pontificate about how they can lecture people like you and me and the rest of us about what we've got to do to change our life to reduce our emissions. What do you think to it all? Get in touch. Stephen said, Michelle, this can bill is an absolute joke. You feel it's all for government control. Keep your thoughts coming in. You can get in touch, as I said, all the usual ways. Coming up in the show, lots we need to discuss. Donald Trump, he's not messing around when it comes to deportations. I also want to ask, why are so many kids in Britain apparently suffering with gender distress? What do you say to that? See you in 2.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Have you noticed that more and more stores are closing? Well, last year, apparently 13,000 stores closed for the last time on the high street.
Well, experts warn the worst is still to come for our small businesses.
Well, let's talk to retail expert Jeremy Baker. Good morning to you, Jeremy. How bad is it and what can be done?
Well, nothing can be done about it. Retail is like that. It's a boom and bust operation. So last year, let's say you had a shop and it was booming. This year, the consumer can just change their mind. They don't need to come back to your shop ever again.
Well, it is sad, Jeremy, because our high streets are the beating heart of our communities, aren't they? And for many people, I know I can relate to my high street, it is such a depressing sight, walking down there and seeing them all boarded up and closed down.
But how often do you walk down that boarded up high street? I think people move on to something else. The online world is very big, and lots of other things are very exciting. And so people, you know, the shop. I like to go to my GP in a shopping centre and get my tests done there rather than tramp off all the way to the GP, for example. And children could go to little schools in the high street. I've seen that happen already. So lots of things could happen to the high street. It could be much more a social centre, much more kind of like pubs, coffee shops, all that. Charities. I don't see anything wrong with charities taking over, but the idea of the shop-centred high street finished, that's gone, never coming back. Goodbye. It's not sad, it's just life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News. Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Jubes and Kerr, Charlie Downs and Samuel Sweek alongside me. How concerned are you, by the way, about climate change? Is it something that keeps you awake at night or not? I have to say there's not a lot of support for this CAN bill that we've just been discussing. CAN, Diane says, this bill would restrict who could fly and what car you own and whether or not you even get to keep your own home and land. I've got to say there were some elements within that bill that really were quite far-reaching. I'll leave you all at home to be the judge of whether or not you support it. Many of you, I have to say, you are quite concerned about the climate change, but get in touch. All views are very welcome. Now, I do just want to tell you about this. A new report out says that children in England are 50 times more likely to suffer from so-called gender distress compared to over a decade ago, according to NHS records. In 2011, just 200 people under the age of 18 identified as transgender or struggled with gender dysphoria. But by 2021, it was up to gone 10,000, and I would argue that when they recalculate it post-2021, the numbers will be through the roof. What do you think to all this, Charlie Downs?
Well, this language that's used in the headlines talking about this story of gender distress, I think is basically code for mental illness. And it's no secret that, you know, my generation and below are, experience unprecedented levels of mental illness. This, again, is something I've spoken about on the show before. What I think this comes from is, among other things, a lack of belonging. And I think that that is a result of a number of things, including bad education and ideologically driven education about the history of this country, the idea that we should be ashamed of our nation, ashamed, of our various identitarian credentials, which is why the left offer young people the identity politics that they do, along the lines of race, along the lines of sex, along the lines of sexuality, and so on. And that is part of this story. But I think that to deprive...
How does someone being taught, I don't know, Brits are all racist or whatever it is that they get taught, or some would think that they get taught, how does that make a boy then think, actually, I'm a girl?
Because what that does is it deracinates the person in question. It makes them feel as though they are not part of a people. And if they are, they should be ashamed of that people. And so they go searching for identity in other places, like in gender or in race or whatever else. But I think that really those are poor replacements for what would would in ordinary times be, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of place. And I think it's the lack of those things that so many young people experience that drives them towards, again, what's described here as gender distress. And I just think that the conversation about this is wrong. We are talking about downstream consequences of a more fundamental issue, which is that we've behaved as if living under this kind of liberal moral paradigm that we have since the end of the Second World War, we've behaved as if individual self-expression is the most important possible thing. The idea that you can't judge people and so forth, and that, your own identity, self-defined identity, is the most important thing. But what I think that does to people is it makes them a little bit loopy.
Sarah?
Well, no, I can't really say I agree with any of that. What I would say, though, if we want to talk about, I don't know about the lack of British identity or whatever, but what I do think creates a hostile environment for trans people, and why so many younger people particularly may suffer with gender dysphoria, is because of the climate of which they live in, where you have political, media and public figures demonising them. I think the conversation very often about trans people descends immediately into the gutter and removes the dignity and justice that these people deserve. Just like us, trans people want and deserve housing, education, jobs, opportunities, but so often are they derided in debates as being deviant, as being wrong in some way and not supported. I think the number...
Well, hang on, some of these fellas that go around dressed as women with their, their fake bits in their bras, they are deviants, quite frankly.
I don't know who you're referring to.
Well, there's a condition, what's it called? I'm probably going to get...
Gynephilia?
Yeah, that. Where, sorry if you've got children listening or if you're a sensitive disposition, where some men actually get sexually aroused by the thought of themselves as women in women's stuff.
Right. Well, whilst I'm sure those people do exist, I can imagine that's an extremely tiny minority. But trans people have always existed. Look, historically, back through, go back as far as ancient Greece, ancient Rome, whereas obviously there's not so much the surgical sort of changes people can have these days. Gender dysphoria has long existed. It's in, as I said, mythology. It's in Shakespeare's plays. It's through literature, through the centuries. Now we're at a point of a greater understanding and what should be a greater acceptance of trans people. And unfortunately, many, as I said, in the government and in the media haven't caught up with that time and have made this country a particularly difficult place for transgender people to exist, essentially. I mean, it's worth noting as well, in the United States and in this country, about 50% of trans people have self-harmed and a similar amount have actually attempted suicide. And I think that Charlie makes a point about mental health and trans people, but I don't at all see transgender as a mental health condition. I just think they're extremely vulnerable because of the way that society has developed a hard shell which excludes them in any conversation and removes their dignity.
What I would say, Sam, very quickly, like the climate and nature bill that we were just talking about, this narrative that you're kind of building here, that trans people are somehow uniquely beset upon by society at large, I don't think is true. Because I think if you go into any of the kind of institutions of power in our society, whether that is the government itself or the civil service or an Amazon HR department or a media company or anything else, and you listed off the opinions that you've just given, you would find almost unanimous approval. Because like the climate and nature thing, the trans thing is also an elite project. It's something that has been picked up by power and centred in the mainstream consciousness, despite the fact that this is a tiny, vanishingly small minority of people. With that being said, I agree with you that we shouldn't be deriding these people on an individual basis. I think it's in very poor taste to attack people on the basis of their trans identity. With that being said, I still sort of say that it is an expression of mental illness, because what else can it be? If you are born a male and you are biologically a male, then you can't. It's physically and spiritually impossible to become a female, right? And so in the same way that you wouldn't tell a schizophrenic that there are men in dark suits following them around and that there are bugs in their home and cameras in their walls and so on, you don't tell a male who believes he's a female that he is a female. That doesn't have that person's best interests at heart. What you're doing is you are buying into, supporting and enabling their delusion, which I think is why you see so much what you've just said about self-harm, suicide and so on. I don't think you help these people by supporting these things.
What I will say there, Charlie, is that I think that you can't on one hand say, like, come out against the derision of trans people and then continue to refer to them as being mentally ill.
But that's not an insult. That's a statement of fact.
Right. What I would say to that is that, I mean, yes, trans people factually are absolutely and very often in the mainstream media derided, as we've said, as being deviant, as being...
By whom? Who are we talking about here? Because the mainstream media, I don't think say that. I think the mainstream media say the kind of things that you've been saying about how, about trans rights and so on.
I don't think you can honestly look someone in the eye, look at the headlines of the Daily Mail, the Express, the Sun, and tell me that trans people get a fair trial ever.
But what about, what about the New York Times,
we have people in the media
the Wall
literally
Street
making
Journal?
up hypothetical situations for which to demonise trans people with. What if someone does this? What if someone does that? And, it often comes into the conversation of protecting...
Who sits there and goes, what if someone does this?
When we talk about, like, the changing rooms debate is a perfect example of this. The conversation around...
Why should I, as a female, be forced to get changed in front of a male?
Because this is, again, the conversation about where you view gender and somebody's right to self-autonomy.
I've got no interest in how someone views their own gender. My question was, why should I, as a female, be forced to get undressed in front of a male?
But if we're referring to a trans woman, then that is a woman.
No. A trans woman is a biological male. So I'm asking you again, why should I, as a female, be forced to get undressed in front of a biological male?
Right, but if somebody has a gender,
answer
for example...
that question.
Well, nobody's making you do that, Michelle.
Yes, you do. There's cases going through the courts at the moment. I can think of one such case in the NHS where some nurses are taking action because they were forced to share a changing room with a gender-neutral changing room where there was what you call a trans woman, i.e. a biological male, using those facilities. So, yeah, it actually does happen.
Right,
so I ask you again, why should I, as a biological female, be forced to share and get undressed in front of a biological male?
No. I will say trans men are men, trans women are women. That is my opinion, and I think that we need to respect
So we haven't answered it. So basically what you're saying is I, as a biological female, have to get changed in front of some fella because you say the label is...
That transgender people are... Do you think that trans people exist? Like...
I think that what you call a transgender woman absolutely exists. I don't think it's a figment of your imagination, but I think that they are categorically, biologically male. So therefore, they cannot and should not be able to access female-only spaces. Lots of women like me do not want to have to get dressed and all the rest of it in front of biological men. Yeah. This is not a controversial view. We have single-sex spaces for a reason. We have an epidemic of male violence against women and girls. We've fought hard to get our single-sex spaces. We deserve those single-sex spaces. Those single-sex spaces are often responsible for keeping us safe. And many of us, and there's women that will disagree with me, and I respect that, but many of us do not want biological men in our spaces, our private single-sex spaces, and nor should we have to have them there just in order to satisfy other people's descriptions.
Right, well, I suppose we're going to have to agree to disagree there, Michelle, but
but we always have to agree to disagree, but it's not you that then has to get changed in front of a man.
Right, but
you would, because you're in that man's changing room, but you get what I mean. It's not you that has to then get naked and get changed and get undressed in front of someone of the opposite biological sex against your will. It's always us women that have to suck it up. Okay, and a lot of us, by the way, are fed up of it, quite frankly. Are you or not? Lots of you, by the way, will be fed up with the whole discussion, going, oh, what are you doing, talking about this issue again? Move on. I hear you, and I am going to move on. Donald Trump, after the break, he was talking tough, wasn't he, about immigration and deportations. You want to see what he's doing? I can tell you, he's not messing around. Also, the judges involved in the case of Sarah Sharif, should they be named?
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours sees the most damaging winds from Storm Eowyn move north, turning calmer for many with some frost and ice issues by dawn on Saturday. Here's the position of Aylwin as we go into the evening. It's going to move into Shetland, and the strongest of the winds are going to transfer northwards into central and northern Scotland. Again, the risk of 80, perhaps 90 mile-per-hour wind gusts, but for Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland. Into northern England and North Wales, the worst is now over, and much calmer conditions are expected overnight across many parts, with some rain in the far southeast, but elsewhere clear skies allowing a widespread frost and some icy patches as well, particularly where we've got some rain, sleet and snow showers moving through Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland as well, further snow accumulations over in the hills and some icy patches here and there. But it's a blustery start to the weekend, certainly for Scotland, even if the worst of the winds by this stage are easing. Northern Ireland, much calmer first thing, and for a large part of England and Wales, it's simply blue skies and a fine winter's day is expected for England and Wales, following the blustery and often wet weather that we've seen over the last few days. In fact, in some places, barely a cloud in the sky and light winds. Very pleasant out there, although feeling on the cold side with highs of 7 or 8 Celsius. Feeling particularly cold in the north of Scotland, where those strong winds continue into the afternoon. But for Northern Ireland, we've got cloud and rain moving in, along with gusty winds. Nothing on the scale of Storm Aylwin, of course, but could be some lively weather going through the evening, crossing the country and then clearing into Sunday morning. Sunday morning starts off with the frost across northern and eastern parts of the UK. Further west, we've got the cloud building because the next low comes along, and that's going to bring some wet and windy weather into many western and southern parts of the country by Sunday afternoon. Not on the scale of Aylwin, but not particularly welcome either.
The latest GB News travel. Good evening. Storm Aylwin continues to cause wide disruption on the roads in Scotland, particularly where many motorways remain closed. These include the M9 northbound south of Stirling off the M80, the M74 down in South Lanarkshire northbound, junction 13 to 11 south of Larkhall, and east of Glasgow the M8 is closed westbound, so heading towards Glasgow from junction 5 to 6A. A lorry overturned in the blustery winds. East Lothian, the A1 at Dunbar stays closed, and in Leicestershire north of Syston the A46 is closed southbound at Six Hills following an accident. Down in Wiltshire northwest of Warminster the A36 is closed for accident investigation work. West Coast mainline trains aren't running north of Preston, neither are East Coast mainline trains north of Newcastle, and you're being advised not to use trains north of York. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Hello there, welcome back everybody. Michelle Dewberry until 7, Charlie Downs, Samuel Sweek alongside me. Now, we will all remember the absolutely horrific case and murder of Sarah Sharif. That name will be forever etched on my mind, I can tell you. Well, there's been lots of conversations about the judges who oversaw the family court proceedings, whether or not they could and should be named. Originally, the judge ruled that no, they couldn't. He was saying that he was concerned about essentially like vigilantes and things like that. Well, anyway, yes, now they can be ruled. The Court of Appeal has ruled. Do you think that this is the right decision, Charlie Downs?
I'm a bit split on this one, to be honest, because I'll be honest with you, the Sarah Sharif story actually passed me by for whatever reason. It wasn't on my radar when it was actually happening. So it's only something I've really read up on quite recently. It's a horrific story, but it's the latest in a long line of these kinds of stories, with, of course, the case of Axel Rudikabana most recently being one where a clear tragedy in the making was allowed to fall through the net, despite the fact that there were things that were known to the authorities. There were obvious signs in both of these cases that something was wrong. I think this narrative about a concern about lynching that's certainly very strong language. But I don't necessarily buy it. I think that we live in quite a civilised country on that front. And so, I think it's probably right that the name of this judge is revealed to the public.
Do you?
Yeah, do you know what? I was reading about this earlier, and it's, Sarah Sharif, the case is one of the worst, a poor child to go through what she did and to be so deeply failed by the authorities is unthinkable, and like Charlie says, it's the latest in a long line of state failings, essentially, to protect vulnerable people or to point out where things could have been different and lives could have been saved. I don't actually have a particular strong feeling either way on whether or not the identities of the judges should be made public. I think there are probably people better qualified than I am to make that decision. So I accept this ruling, of course, from the Court of Appeal. But what I will say is there does need to be a wider conversation about how we can properly avoid something like this happening again. It's, as we said, it's the latest in a long line. You can go back as far as Baby P, within the last couple of years. Victoria Climbié before that.
There's loads. I mean, we cover these stories, don't we? I think it's not night after night. It feels like that. We certainly cover these tragedies all too often. Anyone that watches this programme will know I get very, very angry and upset each single time I hear these stories. But you tell me, the naming then of these judges, is this the right decision? I mean, it'll certainly make people accountable for their actions and decisions, won't it? But what does accountability actually even look like? Get in touch and let me know your thoughts. Now, Donald Trump, he was talking very tough indeed, wasn't he, during the election period about what he's going to do with the border, setting up national emergencies and so on. Let's listen to him speaking today.
I'm also taking swift action to stop the invasion at our southern border. They allowed people to come in at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It was ridiculous. I decided and declared to do, and very, very importantly, a national emergency on our border, immediately halted all entry of illegal border crossers, of which there were many, and began promptly returning the illegal trespassers back to the place from which they came. That action, as you've probably seen, has already started very strongly. I've deployed active duty U.S. military and National Guard troops to the border to assist in repelling the invasion. It was.
I can tell you now, it's not messing around. They've arrested 1,300 people. Apparently, 1,000 of them were criminals. I don't know if you saw this image. It was doing the rounds today all across social media. I saw it and I was looking at it on the tiniest little phone ever. There was this one and then there was another one. And I thought to myself, why are they wearing matching jackets? That was my first thought. And when I zoomed in, I realised it wasn't matching jackets at all. What it was is chains. They'd put chains around these guys. Charlie, where are you on this?
Well, it's amazing how quickly the Overton window has shifted on this topic over the last few years. Because if, even 2 years ago you'd raised the topic of mass deportations, I think you would have been met with quite a bit of pushback in polite circles. But now we're arriving at a point where Trump has demonstrated that if you have the political will to properly and seriously deal with this problem, then it can be done. In the UK, to apply it to our kind of situation, we have, Pew Research Centre estimated in 2017 that there could be as many as 1.2 million illegal migrants residing in the UK. Now, this is a mixture of people who have overstayed visas, people who've come across the Channel, people who've come through the Channel Tunnel on lorries and so on. And until each and every one of those people is removed from the United Kingdom, we cannot be said to be a serious, self-respecting country. Because if our borders mean nothing, then we aren't a country. And it's, I think the language of invasion, as has been invoked by Trump, is absolutely appropriate. Because how else can you describe the floods of fighting-age males crossing the Channel to arrive in the British Isles as an invasion? I mean, this is something that has been a consistent theme across British history, whether it was the Danes 1,000 years ago, or the Saxons, or the Romans, and so on. This is something that our nation has faced many times before. This is simply the most recent manifestation of it. And until we are prepared to actually do something real about this, and what I'm talking about when I say that is a programme of mass deportations and deploying something, something like deploying the Royal Navy into the Channel to repel the boats and so on, I don't think we're taking it seriously. So I think Trump is demonstrating, he's sort of being the model to follow for other European nations.
Have you noticed in the States that they often use the description illegal aliens? Have you heard that? What do you think to that? I don't like that. Samuel, what's your thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, it's interesting you pick up on the terminology there of illegal aliens. And the reason for that is, in my mind, quite simple. It's to dehumanise a group of vulnerable people and to make them
How do you know they're vulnerable?
Because they're refugees, because they're trying to cross the border.
How do you know they're refugees? How do you not know there might be economic migrants?
They might be economic migrants, but
they're coming vulnerable if they're an economic migrant?
Yes, they are, because they're trying to go to a different country. They're trying to make a life for themselves. They're going to be in all sorts of financial insecurity. They're going to be...
How do you know?
Well, if they're not going to be millionaires crossing the border, are they?
If they were in financial insecurity, how would they be able to afford the thousands of pounds that people traffickers charge them to cross the Channel when they could, in fact, buy a flight from their home country, or at least a safe country that they're in, France, for instance, come to the UK, and so there's a record of who they are, and claim asylum when they get here?
Because they're being trafficked. Simply that. When traffickers bring people to a different country, whether it be the UK, whether it be across Europe, people are essentially moved and are paying off a debt. That's what trafficking is. It's exploiting those people. And often refugees are exploited when they come to this country, when they try and cross the channel. And in the United States, there's also an exploitative trafficking sort of operation that's going on. Now, what's really concerning for me is to see people who are attempting to come to the United States legally are being essentially having their meetings with the border forces and agencies rejected, cancelled, and turned down. It's deeply concerning that somebody can deploy the army, the actual armed forces, and treat people with such little consideration of humanity as Donald Trump is willing to show in this press released photo.
He's prioritising the citizens of his own country, isn't he? If he was here now, that's what he would say.
But is he, though? I mean, is he? I mean, if you look at the first week we've had of Donald Trump as the president, what we've essentially seen is that whilst, yes, he is deporting people, the majority of the things which he has brought in via executive orders are not worth the paper they're written on. How is anything Trump's going to do, from changing the name of Denali back to Mount McKinley, from changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, going to help everyday Americans? The leading cause of debt in the United States is healthcare bills. Mm-hmm. What would help is to bring in, say, universal healthcare.
But how can you bring in universal healthcare when you have an ever-expanding population, many of whom are taking more from the system than they're contributing?
$1 million question. I can tell you as well, another executive order that Donald Trump did indeed bring in. Did you see him signing out on his first night? That there's only 2 genders, what he calls, that will be recognised in American law, male and female. I can tell you right now, I was high-fiving myself when he was doing that, and I was hoping that that is indeed going to trickle down to this country. We can but hope, can't we? Up next, after the break, Jubes Tavern opens. Yes, I want to talk to you about Argentina's president. He has basically been saying that us in Britain, wokeism is destroying our country. Is he right?
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Unsettled at times across western parts of Europe. This includes Portugal, Spain and parts of northwest France. We're likely to see some heavy rain, also some strong winds at times. Largely settled across Tenerife, but Madeira, parts of Portugal, Spain, northwestern France could see some showers merging into longer spells of rain at times, and also some strong winds. As we head further east, largely settled across Rome and also parts of Greece, but a chance we could see some showers here as we head into next week, with the best of the temperatures across Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
A woman of 53 has believed for 18 months she was in an online relationship with Brad Pitt.
I think we're seeing pictures. So these are the pictures that she received that made her believe that she was in this relationship with Brad Pitt.
And you'll see that some of it is in hospital because the scammer was claiming that he was suffering from cancer. This was playing very much on her emotion. So this is a divorcee who lived in Mauritius. She'd received a £700,000 divorce settlement, or £650,000 divorce settlement, I should say, and £700,000 has been taken from her through this scam.
Yeah.
As she was becoming, every time she became suspicious, the money was taken for payment of charges on gifts that she never received, and then hospital fees. There was lots of emotions being played into there. Now, as somebody, I'm a rom-com writer by trade, so I write romantic fiction. And one of the books I've written has actually been about somebody who did online dating, got herself into a whole heap of trouble. Not quite, she wasn't in a relationship with Brad Pitt, but she met somebody dodgy. So because I've written that book, I've met a lot of people who've come up to me and said, oh, it's happened to me.
It's scary in this digital age, isn't it?
They've lost $700,000, but somebody has tried it on. Somebody my question is, would a man go 18 months in a relationship online without seeing somebody and keep it going? Or is this feeding into this neediness of a particular demographic of a woman who that's better than anything else she'd got going on in her life, was what was being fed to her over the internet? I just
and then maybe a little bit of her knew, but she kind of just suppressed it because she
was hoping it was Brad Pitt.
Her daughter apparently for a year was saying, this can't be true, come on, think about it. But she just fell for it. But I just wonder, what's right, it's a very sad story. She's obviously now getting a lot of hate and ridicule as well.
Because she's been on French TV and she's had a huge amount of pushback from it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Samuel Sweek and Charlie Downs are alongside me. It's my favourite part of the week, ladies and gents. I can't lie. Jubes Tavern opens, and I know some of you do raise a glass with us at home. So cheers to each of you. Cheers to my panel, neither of whom are drinking. But you know what? I'm absolutely fine. I'm a big girl. I can have a drink all on my own. Cheers.
Empowered.
Yes, cheers to each and every single one of you. You two are far more sensible than me. One of these days, I might be sensible too. I tried dry January last year on this programme, anyone that was watching. We closed Jubes Tavern for about a week, and after that I was like, yeah, no thanks, just open it again. Anyway, look, lots of you getting in touch. Again, not much support for that climate and nature bill. Gender distress. Isaac says, Michelle, I've got 2 words for this, which is work education. I've got to say, we've just been chatting about that briefly in the break between ourselves. I do think that the education system, and one of the things when you look in primary schools, this stuff is all over primary schools, and you can make of that what you will. But look, Javier Milei, how do I pronounce this? I always get it wrong. Milei, there you go, Milei. The fellow with the chainsaw. You all know he is. He's the president of Argentina. Anyway, he's been speaking out in Davos, and he reckons that wokeism is essentially suppressing the debate about immigration. It's causing so many problems, he goes on to say, in this country. Is wokeism causing problems?
Now, this term, wokeism, well, first of all, the first thing I'll say is I do find it sets off alarm bells in my head when foreigners talk about our affairs like they know, everything about them. I think that Britain's issues are Britain's to deal with. And so, as much as I basically agree with what Milei is saying.
But hang on, because we've just been sat here pontificating about Trump and America.
Well, that's true, but maybe I'm a hypocrite.
Don't be a hypocrite. Yeah,
maybe I'm a hypocrite.
Go on.
But on this topic, I mean, this word wokeism, I think I've always had a problem with it because it's very sensationalised. It's very much a kind of, if you call something woke, then it must be bad and all the rest of it. I think that the actual definition and the ideology itself, the actual content of the ideology itself, has been lost because of sensationalisation. I think that our government, I think that woke it's an elite project that has been picked up by power. We saw this in the case of BLM, for example. BLM, as an expression of wokeness, was picked up by the Democrat Party in 2020 and 2021 when it was politically convenient, and you saw them get mainstream coverage, you saw them get loads of money, and then when it stopped being politically convenient, they were dropped, and now you don't hear from Black Lives Matter. And the entire ideology of woke is exactly the same. It's a pet project of the elites.
But hang on, because there was a bit more to it than that, because when you actually looked at the organisation of BLM, there was some very, very strange stuff going on. There was some very strange objectives of that group, and I think that was one of the reasons that people more and more started to distance themselves.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, if you look into the anti-family stuff, for example, that's a real problem. But so much of this stuff pertains to a tiny minority of the population, whether it's the trans stuff that we've been talking about today, whether it's the LGBT stuff, obviously T being trans, whether it is the race stuff, whether it's, any of the rest of it. This is such a tiny population. And I think that woke, what gets called woke, is essentially used, because it is so obviously nonsensical and so obviously insane, it's used to distract people from talking about real issues, like, for example, immigration that we've been talking about today. That's something that has a tangible, real effect on the lives of ordinary people and the fabric of the country itself.
Samuel?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you've read the full transcript of Milei's speech, but other things he also described as being woke in that speech was the concept of femicide and women being victims of crime, or the fact that someone is a woman being a factor in them being a victim of a murder, say, by an ex or a partner. That was by Milei described as wokeism.
This is what I'm talking about. Everything's woke. Everything bad is woke.
Well, that's it.
Should we listen to him? Because we're all talking about what he said. Let's just quickly listen to the fellow himself. Go on.
With each of these discussions, wokeism's first strategy is to discredit those of us who challenge these things. First by labeling us, and then by silencing us. If you're white, you must be a racist. If you're a man, you must be a misogynist or part of the patriarchy. If you're rich, you must be a cruel capitalist. If you're heterosexual, you must be heteronormative, homophobic or transphobic.
Carry on, Samuel.
Yeah, no. As I said, he described the concept of femicide as being woke. He said that the gender pay gap was woke, and he also implied that everyone who is LGBT is a sexual deviant. So I think that there are things that we can discuss from his speech being utter nonsense, because that's true. But what I think is a bigger point is that it's incredibly worrying that somebody who is willing to be so dismissive of the genuine issues faced by so many people as being wokeism is a nonsense. It's deeply concerning, and it's for political discourse and debate should worry all of us.
Well, you mentioned gender pay gap there. Don't even get me started on that. We need to look at this on this topic, because I have very strong opinions on that. I can tell you that for free. But we'll have to save that for another day, because it's almost time to say farewell. Leslie says that the judges in the Sarah Sharif case should be named. The faceless people behind bad decisions are allowed to hide. No more, she says. Speaking of no more, there's no more from us. Thanks, gents, for your time. Thank you to each of you. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you Monday night.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours sees the most damaging winds from Storm Eowyn move north, turning calmer for many with some frost and ice issues by dawn on Saturday. Here's the position of Eowyn as we go into the evening. It's going to move into Shetland, and the strongest of the winds are going to transfer northwards into central and northern Scotland. Again, the risk of 80, perhaps 90 mile-per-hour wind gusts, but for Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland. Into northern England and North Wales, the worst is now over, and much calmer conditions are expected overnight across many parts, with some rain in the far southeast, but elsewhere clear skies allowing a widespread frost and some icy patches as well, particularly where we've got some rain, sleet and snow showers moving through Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland as well, further snow accumulations over in the hills and some icy patches here and there. But it's a blustery start to the weekend, certainly for Scotland, even if the worst of the winds by this stage are easing. Northern Ireland, much calmer first thing, and for a large part of England and Wales, it's simply blue skies and a fine winter's day is expected for England and Wales, following the blustery and often wet weather that we've seen over the last few days. In fact, in some places, barely a cloud in the sky and light winds. Very pleasant out there, although feeling on the cold side with highs of 7 or 8 Celsius. Feeling particularly cold in the north of Scotland, where those strong winds continue into the afternoon. But for Northern Ireland, we've got cloud and rain moving in, along with gusty winds. Nothing on the scale of Storm Eowyn, of course, but could be some lively weather going through the evening, crossing the country and then clearing into Sunday morning. Sunday morning starts off with the frost across northern and eastern parts of the UK. Further west, we've got the cloud building, because the next low comes along, and that's going to bring some wet and windy weather into many western and southern parts of the country by Sunday afternoon. Not on the scale of Eowyn, but not particularly welcome either.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Widespread disruption continues due to the wrath of Storm Airwin. Many motorways in Scotland in particular remain closed. These include the M9 northbound just off the M80 near Bannockburn south of Stirling. The M74 northbound closed from junction 13 to 11 to the south of Larkhall. Meanwhile, the M8 is closed on two stretches westbound junction 29 to 30 just north of Paisley, and also westbound further along from junction 5 to 6A east of Glasgow. A lorry overturned in the strong winds. In Leicestershire, north of Syston, the A46 is closed southbound after a recovery truck was involved in an accident with a car and left a spillage behind. And no trains on the West Coast Main Line north of Preston, on the East Coast Main Line north of Newcastle. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Imagine how £50,000